Good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here. It's a very important moment for me because this event comes at the end of a cycle and will probably open another one. So I would like to start from breaking news. Everybody knows what is the topic we are dealing with, abuses in sports. So I don't want to do a heavy introduction. So I would like to start with some breaking news from today. This is something regarding Germany. And it's about the president of the German Swimming Federation. And he said, according to the current knowledge, not all necessary measures were taken in the past to protect the victims and not just them. We would like to take the chance to apologize sincerely with all these people on behalf of the whole federation. To beg for pardon is already a sign of goodwill. This is what the president of the German Swimming Federation said. Just a few people apologized. Very few people apologized for the sexual abuse and for harassments in sports. Probably nobody apologized for them. And still today in Italy, we are living through a moment in which we are changing the federal leadership, and nobody within their own programs introduced this topic. The trouble is that we will have to wait for a lot of time in order for this topic to become the centerpiece of the federal policies of future presidents. There's still a long way to go, but luckily, we are not alone in this journey. We have good company. So on Christmas Day, FIFA President Gianni Infantino said very important things. Stop sweeping dust under the carpet. And he started a work which our guests will talk about. And our guests will also shed light on this change of culture within sports. And this is just the beginning. It will never be enough, but it's just a great start. And I think that Infantino's words are a good account of this great start. There is another thing we would like to talk about, and it focuses on the role of football or soccer. It has a very important role for the effect that may have on other sports. So it is very important on social topics, not just related to violence, but with Roberto Samaden, we've been talking about the topic of language. And I believe that this is part of a global and comprehensive approach regarding all these phenomena, which were always kept somehow hidden and forgotten, like the people, the victims and the families who are left alone. So I'd like to leave the floor right away to Mr. Mario Galavotti, the director of the independent committees of FIFA. I had the chance of knowing him and appreciating him for his very direct ways and his very concrete way of working. Mario Galavotti, the floor to you. So good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good night, or good morning to our friends from beyond the pond from the United States. Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope this particular moment that we are living through and which still forces us to talk through a screen will be over soon. And it won't be too demanding for each one of you. My colleague Joyce Cook and I accepted this invitation with huge pleasure by this invitation by Daniele and Cavallerosa, and they are a source of inspiration for the project that we'll be talking in a few minutes. But before starting my presentation, I would like to give you a direct account of some recent experiences made by FIFA, leading us somehow to intercept what Daniela is doing in this sector, FIFA have been working for a long time on these dynamics and these topics. And these recent experiences that we had in FIFA, and which FIFA mentioned before, led us to start a new project which Joyce is talking about, and probably she'll do it better than me. So I am in my country due to the pandemics, but for more than 3 years I've had the privilege of being the director of this new division created in the latest FIFA reform in 2016, which was driven by the new president, Mr. Gianni Infantino. And among the independent committees, a particular place is occupied by the so-called Ethics Commission, or the Ethics Committee, which is the disciplinary body of FIFA dealing with the investigation and the punishment and repression of the violation of the FIFA Ethics Code. Violations which are committed by the so-called football officials, so the people who are subject due to sporting relationships to the codes and the statutes of FIFA. Unfortunately, as we all know, in cases of harassments and abuses in sports, which are unfortunately almost entirely directly to minors, these events have crowded the newspapers all over the world. So I've prepared some slides which I wanted to show you. Can you see the screen? Okay. And I would like to give you the framework of these FIFA framework, the regulatory framework within the football regulation framework. FIFA is committed in preventing this plug through a set of, let's say, tools and regulations. First and foremost, the statute, the FIFA statutes, which says that FIFA is committed to respecting all internationally recognized human rights. And this also thanks to the constitution in 2017 of an advisory board on human rights, which achieved important goals, leading FIFA to the achievement of these important goals. For example, the protection of the workers' right in the construction of new stadia in Qatar for the 2022 World Cup, the freedom of circulation of athletes, the access of women in stadia in those countries in which they weren't allowed. And the most important part is the adoption of a new code of ethics in 2018-2019. The new code of ethics by FIFA was adopted, and it contains a new formulation for the safeguard of all sports people and zero tolerance towards any kind of violence, and that is assured by very severe sanction up to the ban towards those who commit acts of violence or abuses against the person, especially if that person belongs to the vulnerable categories. But FIFA have always adopted, and Joyce will talk about that, have also adopted some support programs, and this talking about prevention, obviously. So some support programs envisaging also also some funds for national football associations in order to adopt appropriate safety measures in order to guarantee the safety and the security in the world of soccer and the protection of minors. So as I mentioned before, the most important part regarding the code of ethics is the one envisaged by the new Article 23, imposing the obligation to respect human dignity by banning any kind of verbal, physical, and psychological violence vis-a-vis any person, and also threats or the promise of advantages by abusing one's position. And it's the abuse of power and abuse of authority, which is the ones that we've had today to deal with in the recent dramatic experiences in the world of soccer. So what happens when we are notified about the violation of a code of ethics, especially the abuse against a person? An investigation starts, well, an investigation starts in the FIFA's ethics committee, and it starts when the investigatory chamber is notified about a violation, about an abuse or a harassment. Let's say a violation of a code of ethics, and this can happen through a complaint. Someone is complaining or provides information, or through information gathered from the media or from third parties, or anonymous information which are received by FIFA and which has a very advanced whistleblowing system of anonymous reports that can be interesting for the investigatory chamber of the FIFA Ethics Committee. So when this happens, the first thing is to assess the jurisdiction, if it is something violating the code of ethics. If we are witnessing a crime, then the matter is referred to the relevant public authorities, for example, the police. And if the ethics committee believes to have jurisdiction for the matter, the ethics committee opens an investigation. So what we've seen is that in the investigations for sexual abuse or sexual harassment, one of the most important aspects, from which we had also the idea of the projects which we'll introduce in a few minutes, is the protection of the survivors and of the witnesses. So if a person is subject to threats, or if his or her privacy or safety is threatened, is jeopardized by the claimer of the investigations, because everything that happens in football and soccer has a big effect on the media, the FIFA code envisages that his or her identity shall be protected. So the account will be anonymized, completely anonymized, in different places or only in writing. His or her voices may be distorted, and his or her identity preserved in a reserved file, which is inaccessible by the parties, and only the judicial authority can access that file. So this was something very important. This has been something very important in this new code of ethics, in this new procedure by FIFA, and also in the new FIFA disciplinary procedure, because this is the most delicate aspect in order to solve some investigations. Along with this, FIFA, both through the special programs in which Joyce is working, FIFA, and going case by case, obviously, but FIFA envisages some measures to psychologically support victims or the witnesses that somehow affected by these investigations. For example, information that force the victims or the survivors to go away, to flee away. So the FIFA activates support programs, also helping by delocalizing these people, so with a sort of witness protection program. So this is what unfortunately happened. This happened in the most recent stories. And you've also heard talking about a couple of years ago, we've had a very dramatic situation in the Afghanistan Football Federation, in which, thanks to the courage of a person who found shelter abroad, a very delicate investigation, a very complex investigation started in a very complex country for many reasons. And the outcome of that investigation was the start of a disciplinary sanction against the president of that football association, which ended up with a ban of that person, which was also confirmed by the International Sports Court. So you can see the motivation of these decision by FIFA in the FIFA website, and also the arbitration by the International Courts of Sports in Lausanne, which is the appeal body of any decision taken by FIFA. And they are enlightening decision also, and they also tell the difficulty of sports regulatory bodies in order to conclude investigations with tools which are not the tools that law enforcement or judicial authorities have. However, they are tools which are available to sports organizations, which are private organizations, and often without any contribution by the public authorities of the countries involved. In the case of Afghanistan, we've had a sort of cooperation with judicial authorities. We've had a lot of cooperation with the United Nations agencies working in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a country in which the UN is has a lot of presence for other reasons. And past summer, and I'm going to end, and then I will introduce the project we're talking about. So last spring, we've had what we believe is the most dramatic experience. Probably for me, it was the most dramatic experience since I've been working with FIFA, which is the investigation on the Haitian Federation. Last spring, a journal investigation by the Guardian, a British newspaper, and thanks to Romain Molina, a French journalist, that newspaper reported some abuses perpetrated by managers by executives of the Haitian Federation. So we were in the middle of the pandemic. Haiti is not a socially simple country. It's very complex from the social perspective. So we've immediately realized by starting this investigation within the ethics committee. So we realized that it wasn't easy, not just to travel and to visit the places, interview the people, make investigations, but we were in front of total omerta, total lack of, total silence, total lack of cooperation with local law enforcement. So we found vis-a-vis difficulties in the investigation. So the ethics committee modified the methods of these investigations by appointing, and this was something that we'll talk about later, appointing a local panel of experts made of juridical, medical, and psychological experts, so that they could interview the accused people, because in an investigation, with this investigation, we wanted to punish the people responsible of the abuses. But these experts were also supposed to have the witness account and to support the victims and the witnesses, so to collect all the informations which could be needed to start and complete the disciplinary procedure, which happened as a fair process, a fair trial. So there is a debate, there is an examination and cross-examination with judges. So we also had to comply with the burden of proof and the limit of the typical laws. Well, I'm a lawyer, so I deal with that and probably I give it for granted. But if you don't have a legal background, you always need to think that in order to adopt sanctions, you need to have proof, you need to have evidence and an independent body. So that's what happened. It was a very long and complex investigation during the pandemic. So with additional logistic difficulties. And this investigation, part of it has concluded. We've had decisions, but we still have 4 trials ongoing, so I won't go too much into this. But this is important because this investigation led FIFA to think about a new project on this matter. Why is that? Because we've said that, well, in this investigation, we discovered a systematic set of abuses. It was a dramatic experience. We came out affected from this. A very long set of abuses all over a long period. So as Daniela said, probably somebody didn't realize it or didn't want to realize it. So we were supposed to change the systems then. So why we realized that? Because the victims of very young girl, 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, they didn't trust the sporting organizations, sporting bodies of their nation. So they didn't talk because they didn't trust and they didn't think that it could change things. So this made us think. That's where we started thinking about the project that FIFA is bringing forward. And Mr. Infantino talked about it with important government leaders, with the United Nations, with the European Union. So if football or soccer in 2020, which is rich in FIFA in 2020 invested 1,200,000 euro in the ethics committee. So if football is rich with a world organization with a huge media resonance, cannot prevent, or let's say cannot provide trust in its young athletes in reporting the abuse they are suffering, what happens in other sports? Probably it's worse, because in other sports, probably they don't have the budget, they don't have the financial, media, or organizational tools that football has. So that's where the idea of creating an agency, an entity, an organization, and Joyce would talk about it in detail because we progressed on that and we are going to the final solution. But we would like to create something that can independently, so with an external organization, so something independent from sports organization, to a body that can investigate, prevent on the place with the local network, even whereas possible in the countries when you have a state of law, when you can cooperate with local authorities. So we want to, so an independent body can gather information, evidence, and put them at the disposal of the justice bodies of sports organizations in order for them to adopt the disciplinary sanctions envisaged by the regulations. We believe that this is essential. We started a consultatory process, then Joyce will talk about it, and we think it's essential in order to somehow prevent or regulate this phenomenon that has impressive number and which are often related to social unease, which is very bad social situation. So you have abuse of power by the sports organization in also situations of poverty or cultural poverty, which need.
Thank you very much, Mario Galavotti. I would like to take the floor very briefly. Thank you very much, Mario. And I would like to make a couple of comments on your speech. You used some terms, silence, whistleblower, protection. These are words that do not seem to come from sports world. Mario is talking about situations of poverty, of lack of culture, but actually these happens also where we have an advanced culture and a degree of awareness that should be higher. And why is that? I believe that what Mario said is what we should focus on, the lack of trust towards institutions. We have different forms of sports justice, and we have some cases where we don't have specific panels for minors or women, where there is no privacy nor confidentiality. So in the cases we've been dealing with, we witnessed very severe cases of retaliation towards children and adolescents whose testimony was made fun of. And this is something that I was struck by, and it broke my heart. Unfortunately, I saw a testimony that was made fun of by other people, and this was happening in Italy, not in Haiti or in other faraway countries. And what I was struck by Mario's words was also about numbers, figures. These numbers are impressive. They are incredible. And I would like to leave the floor to Joyce. But before, let me introduce Khalida Popai. So after Joyce, Khalida won't talk. She's a friend of ours. We found her very useful for this project, and I'm particularly happy to have her here. She's special, just like many other women that are here with us today. And Joyce Cook, FIFA Chief Social Responsibility Officer. Joyce will explain the project by FIFA, a very ambitious project that will change our world, just like the Center for Safe Sports did in America. So in diversity, in different contexts, they both used another word. There is independence from political federal power that is somehow detrimental. So independence independence to be on the right side. This is something very difficult to do sometimes for human reasons. And I say this because 2 years ago, things were very different from today. And this power swallowed us. It prevented us from speaking out. It prevented us from doing anything. So my question today is the same one. Why is it so difficult to stay on the right side? And I hope you will answer this question. Joyce, the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Daniela, and to everybody here today, to a very esteemed panel, and to my dear colleague Mario. I mean, Mario's commitment to the very difficult cases we have faced just takes my breath away, because he gives it his everything. And as he said, these are not easy cases. If I may, I'm going to run you through a little bit about the safe care package we have to support Mario. I'm actually responsible for human rights and anti-discrimination, sustainability, sustainable events, and the environment, and of course very pertinent for today to safeguarding and child protection at FIFA. And Mario and I began working together earnestly in regards to the Haiti case, and having learned a great deal from the Afghanistan case. So if I may, I'll start by sharing my screen and just walk you through some of the steps, and then really get into the nitty-gritty of talking about the new entity that we are calling for. So hopefully I can share the screen with you. Can you see the screen okay? Good, thank you. So I'll start, if I may, by just picking up on what Mario said, that as well as this important investigation that needs to be taking place by experts themselves. So Mario, of course, in the Haiti case, made sure that the team on the ground was a local team that culturally was sensitive and understood the situation, 2 trained psychologists and a human rights lawyer. But in addition, we had learned and had put in measures in the Afghanistan case and all the way through the Haiti case to take care of those victims and whistleblowers that came forward and were able to give evidence to the ethics investigation. And what we've learned is that before anything else, and I'll talk about this further in a moment, it's really critical that as the first and absolute step and priority is to take care of the well-being, the safe refuge, indeed, in these difficult cases. And we're talking about serious death threats in both the cases that we've investigated in Afghanistan and in Haiti so far. But also to offer from the very beginning counselling support, to offer additional legal aid. It's also important that the victims, the whistleblowers themselves, feel able to have their own legal representation if they choose to. And of course, as Mario said, we are doing this and have done this in the cases that we've investigated in really challenging circumstances where perhaps the local framework is not such that it's able to help us with our investigations. So, of course, we are the first, I think, to put our hands up and say that I think all sports were late to the table, including FIFA, including us, including football. It's something we should have been mindful of much sooner, but nevertheless, it came to our attention in 2018. We received a letter from the Scottish Football Association. They had indeed, it's well written in the media. I think there's a BBC 3-part documentary series that takes place next week. And across the UK, they investigated non-recent cases of child abuse, boys and girls, primarily boys, that had occurred right through from the 1970s to the 1990s. And that has unfolded into a case that has taken place in clubs across the country and youth academies during that period. I think more than 800 cases. A police investigation, Operation Hydrant, was launched, and indeed, as well as the dreadful cases that came to light, a lot of lessons were learned. So We know very well that the cases of abuse in sport are increasing. There's not a single day, I don't think, goes by now where there isn't another report in the media highlighting another case, and indeed football hasn't been spared from that, as Mario said, and I've just reiterated. At the moment, there are insufficient preventative safeguarding measures in place across sports. That's, we all have to accept that, and it's a realization we're trying to change as promptly, as smartly, and as effectively as we can. We also need to ensure that we put preventative measures in place across all levels of our game, of course for children, but not only for children, for women, for vulnerable adults as well. But we also need to ensure that in putting those preventative measures in place, we're also able to provide a response mechanism. So we are able to identify concerns and know how to respond to them and where to report those concerns to, i.e. child protection or safeguarding protection. Just run you through a very brief map. I won't go into all of the bullet points, but in 2018, as I said, we had a letter from the Scottish FA. It took us by surprise, I have to confess. At the time, I was the chief of the Member Associations Division, and the letter was forwarded to me. And we realized very quickly that this was undoubtedly going to be the tip of the iceberg. Having spoken to the member associations in the UK, we very quickly had the full support of President Infantino, the FIFA president, our president. He has got right behind this work, behind the responsibility we have from the very beginning. We formed an expert working group immediately, experts from UNICEF, from the Council of Europe, from the member associations that I've just referred to that had experience in regards to cases and had mobilized themselves and brought experts in, and other experts. And that working group continues to support and inform our work to this day. It's an incredibly important working group at FIFA. In 2018, April 2018, we signed the Council of Europe Start to Talk campaign, and which you ran at the beginning of this important event. In 2019, we appointed our first ever expert safeguarding officer, a lady called Catherine Leslie, who came from the UN, having worked out in the field in other parts of the world, including in parts of Africa. And in February 2019, we formed a confederations working group. Those of you that are in football or soccer will know that FIFA has 6 confederations regionally around the world. For our region primarily today, of course, you will know that UEFA is the European Confederation, and then CONCACAF, and so on. And that was an important step for us because we understood very early on we weren't going to fix this without working very closely together. Over the course of a year leading to July 2019, we worked earnestly on a FIFA Guardians, that's the name of our program for safeguarding, toolkit, a set of templates, policy templates, guidance, risk assessment analysis, and so on for our member associations. And we were pleased to finally launch that after a lot of expert consultation and input in July 2019. In August 2019, you will remember we had the Women's World Cup in France, a fantastic event for women's football, really perpetuating still further the game. And we trialed a pilot event safeguarding project at that tournament together with Safe Sport International. In March 2020, we realized that this was needing bigger capacity at FIFA, and we created a dedicated safeguarding and child protection department. In June 2020, Mary and I have begun to work very earnestly to complement our areas of work on the Haiti case, and understanding we needed to provide support to victims and witnesses that had the courage to come forward and to ensure their safety and well-being. And we turned to reference to the UN Secretary General's Office of Trauma and Sexual Abuse and responding to it, and took from their guidelines and created for the first time, I think, in sport, a package of care for victims and witnesses. And the reason I highlight that is to begin to really, I think those of us here that are working in this area understand increasingly, we're breaking new ground, and that's really tragic, but that's the reality. So the sooner we can come together and work really smartly to put all of the measures, all of the frameworks we need in place, the better. In addition, we appointed an event safeguarding, a tournament safeguarding manager, someone that is specializing in embedding, I'll talk a bit about that in a moment, event safeguarding. And in October 2020, we launched a consultation process, which I'm going to talk about a little further on. And then in December last year, we appointed a capacity building and education safeguarding manager to really help to expedite capacity building among our 211 member associations. January this year, we launched the FIFA Guardian Safeguarding in Sports Diploma. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. So first of all, our safeguarding program in a nutshell. I've explained the toolkit to you for our 211 member associations. It's an interactive handbook available in German, French, Spanish and English. We've also translated it now to Arabic, and we're looking at a range of other languages as well. We also introduced obligations into FIFA's own funding programs, the FIFA Forward funding development program for our member associations, requiring that when funds are invested in youth projects, in youth tournaments, that they are required to have really stringent safeguarding measures in place as part of the obligation of that funding. And indeed, when we launched last year the COVID relief funding package, those same obligations were embedded into that funding mechanism as well. In building capacity, not only have we launched the FIFA Safeguarding in Sports Diploma, we run regional workshops together with our member associations, orientation sessions together with the 6 confederations, but we make sure as well that we run workshops for the leaders in the member associations. What we've understood is the importance of leadership taking responsibility for this. So the presidents, the secretary generals, the vice presidents, the senior management in our member associations. And then, as I said earlier, we are now creating a tournament event safeguarding program. We have much more stringent bidding processes, part of new FIFA under President Infantino, and we're now embedding processes for safeguarding at all our tournaments. First focus is on the upcoming youth tournaments next year and on the women's tournament in 23. We're looking at child-friendly cities together with UNICEF for the World Cup in 2026 as well. So those will become mandated requirements of the hosts of all of our competitions. Within that, event-specific training for everybody involved in delivering the tournament at operational level, and a means and a tools for reporting concerns, ensuring that all of the players, the coaches, the entourage, the teams that come understand very well how to complain if something happens during the tournament and where to go to, or indeed if they choose that that's a safe place to disclose something that may have gone on back at home. On-site case management systems so that we can respond immediately on the ground, and also the referral services. So whatever country the tournament is in, it's very clear. And of course, as everyone here will know, when it involves children, in most countries, there is mandatory reporting. So making sure we know exactly where to report anything that happens. I want to talk a little bit more about the safeguarding diploma before really getting into the new entity. I was shocked. We've worked together with our expert working group, UNICEF and others, and we partnered with the Open University to create an open learning educational program for primarily our 211 member associations. We wanted to create a formal education process, a diploma. So we launched the FIFA Guardian Safeguarding in Sport Diploma in January 21. Not only is this the first of its kind in sport, we've been advised by all of those really that live and that breathe this every single day, UNICEF and others, that this is the first of its kind in any sector. So I think for all of us, it's that real understanding of how important safeguarding prevention is, but how often it does not even exist and it's not been formalized. So we made it freely available to all sports. So any sport, indeed anybody, can go and access all of the content and take the course themselves. We have launched course 1, which is Safeguarding Essentials, and we're encouraging everybody in football, doesn't matter whether they work with children, vulnerable adults or not, and indeed anybody, to take course 1. And the reason we've done this is to professionalize the role of a safeguarding officer, primarily in football and our 211 member associations, but across all sports. So we also have looked across FIFA at strengthening the provisions to protect minors, to prevent trafficking. We're strengthening the agent framework to further protect the rights of children, making it will become mandatory to undertake safeguarding training every year. To be an agent of children, agents will have to be registered to qualify to do so. And indeed, the intent is that guardians, parents will be able to go online if their child is approached by an agent, a scout, to ensure that whoever that they're talking to is a bona fide agent, not only a bona fide agent, but a bona fide agent that qualifies to work with youth players, with children that are pursuing a football career. We've also, in our club licensing guidance, introduced the requirement to have a safeguarding officer, and we're really pleased that some of our confederations are already embedding that into their club licensing regulations. To explain the funding obligations we have, and still further, we've worked together with Mario and his team to create internal reporting guidance for FIFA staff. We have a large number of FIFA staff that go on missions, work around the world outside of the pandemic, and we have 10 regional offices around the world that work day to day much more closely with our member associations and their football infrastructures. And what we understand and understood early on is it's important they recognize, record and report, and then pass to the experts, to Mario and his team for investigation, and to my team, to the safeguarding team, for any care support that might be needed, and not to try to investigate themselves. In addition, we're building our networking capacity. We've signed MOUs with UN agencies and regional intergovernmental bodies, and this has been an important element of our work together. We're working together with the likes of UNICEF and their network of credible NGOs around the world that work in this sector. And one of the things in our toolkit is to ensure that our member associations reach out to local expert NGOs. We keep stressing the importance of that, local cultural, legal frameworks and knowledge at a local level, and the help and support they need at country level. We also have stepped wider, raising awareness with the Safe Home digital online campaign that we launched last May together with WHO and the European Commission, working with FIFA legends to raise awareness and basic tips with the increased domestic violence in and around the pandemic, but being mindful that this is an issue and something we're also aware of can increase during the televised sporting events. So that proved to be a very successful campaign for us. It was multiplied by many of our members, I think almost 40 members now globally, with local versions and sharing helplines for support. But really the point of today is to talk to you about the new Safe Sport entity. Mario and I were working very closely together on the Haiti case, and I think it's fair to say that for everybody, I think, that comes into contact with such cases, you cannot help but be affected by them. And we were talking together about the challenges we were facing and what we may do. And we took an idea to the president, who got behind it 1000% immediately. So what are we talking about? Of course, we can put preventative measures in place, and that's incredibly important we do so. But it's also critical that we have remedy, that we investigate cases and we sanction where cases of harassment and abuse occur in sport. And we've learned it needs to be survivor-centered. First and foremost, these are crimes that are often associated with wider corruption, trafficking, and abuse of power. FIFA takes its responsibility very seriously, and I think you've heard very much from my friend and colleague Mario how seriously we take it, with the FIFA Code of Ethics and the work that we go into to ensure we seek justice and remove perpetrators from football. Mario's spoken to you about the challenges we faced, particularly in Afghanistan and Haiti, where we've banned perpetrators for life, and yet they are still at large. And I'll give you a brief example. In Afghanistan, not only helping victims that were brave enough to come forward, had the courage to find and to safe refuge and indeed to settle in other countries. But we then subsequently discovered that the families of those victims were also being terrorized. And during, unfortunately, the pandemic happened at that time, and we put them into safekeeping and temporary places in and around Afghanistan, together with some very brave NGOs. And as soon as we could, as soon as the pandemic allowed, moved them over the border to Pakistan and continued to help and support them. We also understand very well, as we've said, the importance of caseworkers and investigators that are specialized in sexual abuse cases with local know-how and cultural sensitivity. And as we've said, these are crimes first and require the intervention of competent local statutory, criminal and child protection agencies. However, as we've discovered, and we really believed Afghanistan was going to be the most challenging case we would face, how wrong were we? In many parts of the world, such statutory agencies we have to face do not yet exist, perhaps are not trusted or effective, or have only limited capacity. Sport cannot deal with these cases alone. These competencies fall way beyond sports to protect victims and witnesses from abuse and harm, and to bring perpetrators to justice. So hence we have called for the establishment of this new safe sport entity, a safe haven for victims of abuse in sport, but also to assist international sports federations where we are required to step in because it either hasn't happened locally or is unable to happen locally because, as Mario said, it involves the leaders of the associations, the member associations involved, to be able to investigate those cases that fall under our responsibility. So we are looking for a multi-stakeholder consultation process. We indeed announced it, our president announced it on the signing of the UNODC Memorandum of Understanding last September. And then we actually appointed an independent expert consultant in October last year. We are concluding an extensive, we believe, consultation process. We've spoken to many sports, intergovernmental authorities, all of them now, UN agencies, Interpol, law enforcement, child protection agencies, expert NGOs, players' unions, survivors in sports and their groups, investigative journalists, academics, experts and civil society, and indeed some of the national safe sports entities that are now already existing, and many other experts. So the idea is that we would look to receive and to share best practice. And to conclude, we don't want to be too preemptive because we want to ensure that it's an informed consultation. It is coming to an end. And once we have the final report, we will move very quickly to form a working group. We do not want this to be something that's a talking shop for the next 3, 5, 10 years. We are very determined that this needs to happen and needs to happen very soon. And other sports that are facing what we're facing or know that they will be facing what we're facing are already committed to joining us in this regard. So we would anticipate that this new entity will be available to receive and investigate cases of abuse in a trusted environment. The UNODC report on reporting abuse in sport had very clear conclusions. It's very rare that somebody will report abuse within the entity where that abuse is happening. And we all have to face that. And we've worked hard to build trust. But the best way we can really help to eradicate abuse from sports is prevention and then investigation and remedy. That means people have to have the confidence to report in a trusted environment, and right from the point of reporting to be able to receive the support, psychological counselling support they need, and indeed, where needed, safe refuge. A rapid response, extensive global pool of experts that can be promptly mobilized anywhere in the world. When we receive a case of abuse, we cannot wait and delay while we try and find local experts. We have to have a pool of trusted, credible, vetted experts readily on hand. Also, a mechanism for due diligence, screening process, and intelligence sharing. This doesn't happen at the moment. We're very excited by a project that many of you will know that Interpol and Save the Children have undertaken together with the UK government to look at how we can do screening at an international dimension. And then a knowledge hub to share best practice. We understand in football We are the wealthiest sport, but we want this entity to be an entity that every sport can benefit from. So the wealthier sports will support those that are not perhaps as well resourced as some others are. And then to a supporting network for the existing national safe sports entities to knowledge share together and to help supporting countries and sports in establishing new entities. I'm sorry, forgive me for the long presentation. I hope you can see that at FIFA, we understand the challenges at hand, and we are really determined to do our part to eradicate abuse in sport. And we really believe that the right way forward is the new entity we propose. We hope you will support us. I know, Daniela, you've already given very valuable feedback and evidence to the consultation process. We thank you dearly for that. And like Mario, very pleased to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joyce. This is a huge work giving us the dimension of the complexity of all these phenomena and how much these phenomena are big. I mean, their size. So I would like to recall some topics. One, if the difficulty to report. So in these years, I've came across this very simplistic things. Yes, you need to report, but we don't have this idea. We just need to report. Well, that's not the right idea because you need to report whereas possible. I mean, whereas you are listened, whereas the victim is listened to, is understood, and not sent like this. So this simplification comes from those who show that they do not know the phenomenon, proving that they don't have an idea of that. So like to tell to the reports party, which is always at the forefront, to say something just for the sake of it, to assess each case must be assessed individually, each context must be assessed individually. We need to be very responsible. So I like this video by the Council of Europe because it's targeted to adults, and it also you also have responses in the safeguard officers. So it's the adults who need to favor the destruction of this silence and to build the right environment. Because if I'm going to a courtroom or to a federal prosecutor and I'm insulted and then I'm persecuted and so this happens, and they have happened and they are happening every time. So we don't have parties here. We must be driven by logics, by the common sense and intelligence, which are three gifts which are not very widespread. So I would like to tell a couple of things right now. So we have Khalida Popal, who's back. So I see Mario is very happy. And so I would like to ask some questions to Khalida. Thank you very much, because she's always been close to us. And yesterday we've talked, we've joked together. So I was joking on her great sweetness, hiding a huge determination with that not many women have. And I've also told her story, my book, and I wrote this sentence on Khalida. So we're talking about Afghanistan. So in the federal offices in 5 years from 2013 to 2018, there were violences on football players. The girls speak one after another. They are encouraged and supported by Khalida, the voice of the female revolution, of the rebellion of the women in football. She is the founder of Girl Power, an NGO aiming at empower women through sports. So Khalida, what has changed from those years in Afghanistan, from the violences that you had in Afghanistan? Has anything changed? Has anything changed? What is your feeling after some years? What has changed in Afghanistan, in your opinion? Are you there, Khalid? So please, some of the English speakers, please tell Khalida to activate the interpretation mode. She needs to go to the other options.
Khalida, can you hear me okay? It's Joyce here. If you look on the bottom, hey, if you look on the bottom of the screen, it should have in translation. I think maybe Danielle is going to give you the question. If not, I'm happy to try to, but I think Danielle is going to try and speak to you now anyway in English.
Not they were handling the case, but they were doing everything possible to be there for us when we needed in a very stressful situation. It was night or it was morning. They were there. They were answering, from FIFA being the head of women's football department to everybody that we reached. I'm very thankful, and I'm so happy that this system that was presented is actually taking place. I'm happy and I feel more secure that that more girls and women can come and play the beautiful game without giving a lot of sacrifices, without going through what our players went through. I'm done speaking.
I just wanted to jump in, if I may, to say thank you, Khalida, because we recognize and know the courage you showed in all of this as well. And you brought to our attention something that I don't think sports has understood, football hasn't understood, FIFA hasn't understood. And I hope you can see now that we are really working earnestly and determined. And we are not perfect, we're still learning, but thank you. And thank you for that acknowledgement as well, we appreciate it.
Add one thing, like in the last thing, if you don't raise your voice, if you don't talk about the problem, the changes will never happen. So I really encourage everybody listening here, and also Daniela, who is doing a lot to raise awareness about the challenges in Italy, and so many other amazing people. If we cannot say what is happening, if we don't raise our voices, the organizations like FIFA or any other organization, even governments, will not understand, will not know, unless we raise our voices. Our voices have power, and we have to raise our voices when the change is needed. Thank you.
Grazie,
Thank you very much, Khalida. These voices are raising, so we are listening them stronger than in the past. And in particular, I listened, and we started from this episodes told by The Guardian, and that which struck me. So I'm very honored to be to have you here, and I hope to build a long-lasting relationship. It's a huge honor for us, and I'm also satisfied by the acknowledge coming, because the thanks coming from Khalida has an extraordinary value, and I believe that both Mario and Joyce, I think that this is a very beautiful signal. So when we have this respondents in Italy, what happens in Italy? In Italy, we are having many things which are not positive. So what happened is that the technicians are not presenting their the coaches are not presenting their criminal records. We don't know who are these people. So we also, what happens is that a coach can have just a very small temporary ban, even in very serious violations, and we are still always trying to demean. So instead of ban, so you have just temporary suspension of 1, 2, or 3 years. So a very long, big discretionality. So it has, and this can have some fallbacks on those who have the reports. So we are never sure on how it's going to end. And this is, what about the report that leaves us shocked? Because when you have reports in the federal or ordinary court, we need to have some certainties. So we have a magistrate here applying the law, while in federal courts, some of them apply the law more, some other are not applying, but I don't want to tell names. But we don't have guidance. So by listening what Joyce said, so this machine that started, so, but also with these points, and we will need to do something similar. Then I will talk about what the US Center for Safe Sports did in the United States. So, but before going on, I'm seeing that here in Italy, well, I don't want to give a negative impression, but 2 years ago, I knew some people who are present today as yesterday. One is Roberto Samanen, Paolo Giolini, Francesca Garbadino, Paola Pendino. Then we have Francesca Negri, Solange Martignoli. I don't see all of you, but we've had two important tributes. One is Vito Di Gioia. I don't see him here, but I think he's connected. The Italian Football Association is doing a great job. They started a website for minors, and it's a very serious work, which made me happy, because this is something that he believed in a lot. And we have another working group making reference to Inter, Roberto Samaden and Paolo Giulini. And thank you very much, Paolo and Francesca Garbarino. So we had also a tribute for Roberto Samaden, who was the first, Inter was the first club, thanks to Paolo Giulini, anti-pedophilic protocol in football. They are pioneers, but they didn't stop there. They are working with us. They are working together. We are doing projects, and we hope to be friends. And I would like to think about it. So can we send the short video for Roberto Samaden? Thank you very much, Roberto Sama, then director of the school and youth sector of FC Inter Milan. Roberto. So it wasn't envisaged, so this is something, well, probably I think it's excessive, but thank you very much for inviting me today. And it's an honor for me being here and being together with people fighting this battles. So as I said before, to be in charge of an organization when you have children and adults, I think that having this kind of, well, I'm not saying sensitiveness, but this kind of attention is very normal. Obviously, I'm lucky to have people like Paolo Giulini with me, Giovanni Pasculi, and others. So people who deal with an area which is fundamental for us, which is part of the training process of our youth. So what we call the educational area, which needs to deal with informing and training children, families, and the staff, not just on the pitch, but mostly off the pitch. So in this framework, I believe that doing this should be normal, as it is normal to organize league matches, organize transportation, to bring children to the training grounds. So I think that make this normal is something, is the winning card to talk about it, to speak up, or simply to speak about it, because speaking about it can lead us quickly to achieve some results. But I'm not the one who needs to set the bar. But I am very impressed by FIFA's project, and I believe that if the world organization like FIFA started stressing the attention on this topic with a huge project, I believe that the member associations, and especially in the grassroots area, can take huge step forwards. Then I would also like to congratulate you on the book that you wrote, and I would like to steal the words of the others who talked about a very painful book. So really, congratulations, you were great, not just writing it, but putting yourself in it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Roberto. Now, I would like to take a very short break in which we will send a video. I'm very moved I'm very touched in introducing him. Then I will give the floor to Bob, because he asked us. He will then Ketiana, and finally I will entrust the closure to Maria Lester. So since Bob needs to leave because he needs to work, so I'd like to ask the director to send this 4 minutes long video, which is subtitled in Italian. We managed to do it. So we'll relax for 4 minutes. We will take a look at this very short video in which Bob tells who he is. It's very hard to tell you something about Bob. Everybody knows him. He is world famous, so any definition would be demeaning probably. So he was an NBA referee from 1998. So he refereed the 1998 All-Star game. He was an undercover cop. He wrote books, and he also a criminal scientist. And he's researching PTSD, and he is working for the progression of sport. So let's take a look at Bob Delaney's video. So let's take a small break because emotions are too high. And okay, let's take a look at this video.
Every sporting event has 3 teams: the 2 competing and the officiating team. And we're going to talk about that officiating team and spend some time talking about proper authority behavior. But before we get there, many of you who have heard me speak before, No, I like to use a formula. I wasn't good in school. I didn't understand X plus Y equals Z, those kinds of formulas. But this formula makes sense to me. Experiences plus intellectual readiness plus reflection equals development. And if we break it down, experiences are what? You have them and I have them. And if we share our experiences with each other, we learn from each other. Experiential learning is a big part of our foundation as officials and in life. And then intellectual readiness is the actual studying of a subject. We've all done that in our lives. In school, an area of particular study to have an expertise, and we do it in officiating. And for officials, it's the rule book and understanding mechanics. And those two parts to the formula are kind of easy because those are given to us. The hard part is reflection. Our willingness to be reflective, to look inside and to critique ourselves and be willing to hear critiques from others. It's not always that easy. But if we're going to have development and growth, that third part is as important as the first two. So that formula leads us into a conversation for development in the area of proper authority behavior. Especially in our society today, in 21st century, those who have authority have to model proper authority behavior. And what does that mean? The demeanor that you put forth, verbal and nonverbal. How do you handle situations in interacting with coaches, players, with your fellow officials, with fans? All of that is reflective on the organization that you work for. So our responsibility is to have a professional approach. We're not all officiating professional athletes, but we all have the responsibility to be professional officials. That's an expectation. And in 21st century officiating, we need to make sure that we're honing those skills as much as we do when we look in a mirror and we work on our signals. You have to work on your facial expressions, your body language. Watch the video, look in a mirror, see how you act, because that gives an image. And our responsibility is we can't get upset. There's emotion in sports, a tremendous amount of emotion. That's the beauty of it. But as officials, we don't have the luxury of showing emotion. Not to the point that we're angry, not to the point that we're laughing in games, because then people think we're not taking things seriously. So understanding how and when to have a smile, how and when to show a look that you want to make sure that everyone understands that this has got to calm down. All those things are part of what officials do. You know, I was very fortunate. Many of you know my background in law enforcement. The senior man that I worked with when I first went on the job was Bob Scott, and he drilled into my head that just because you have a uniform and a badge doesn't mean you get to be disrespectful or demeaning. And that you'll truly know when you are a professional law enforcement officer. That will be when someone says thank you to you after you give them a ticket or arrest them. They're not saying thank you for what you did. They're saying thank you for how you did it. When you're doing your job and you do it respectfully, people understand that. And that's the same thing in officiating. If we take that same mindset to officiating, we are going to model 21st century officiating behavior. My hope for all of you is that you have a great season once the season begins, and it will one day begin again, and that you all stay healthy, stay safe, and take care of one another.
Bob, it's a pleasure for us to have you here. You are doing a lot of things. So I'd like you to talk us about what you're doing today, and especially regarding your commitment in sports, the topic of integrity, which is what we talk about. And I also believe it is also closely related. Well, I'm reading your very long CV. you are also researching post-traumatic stress disorder, which has also affects many victims of sexual abuse and not just them. So Bob Delaney, the floor to you.
Thank you, Daniela. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And as you hear all these things that I've done, it just means I can't hold a job. I move from one thing to the other. But yeah, I was in law enforcement and did a long-term undercover job back in the 70s. And as a result of going through that, I experienced post-traumatic stress myself and became a student of it and wanted to learn, and that thirst for knowledge grew and grew. And so while I thought of it as a military or law enforcement kind of experience of the traumas that they go through, you also learn as time goes on in the 4 decades I've been doing this work, is that post-traumatic stress, the traumas that come to us through the experiences we have, it's a human condition. I personally think that we've over-medicalized the subject, that we at times, when we call it post-traumatic stress disorder, we conjure up mental illness and we scare people away from having this conversation, a healthy conversation, a needed conversation about trauma. So my belief is that we need to create trauma education and awareness programs through sports in every aspect of our society. Because as Dr. Malika, the director of the Harvard Global Mental Health Trauma and Recovery Program says, trauma is inescapable in life. We are all susceptible to it. And so giving people the tools. Folks, we've done this before. We've done it with HIV/AIDS. We've done it with alcohol. We've done it with drugs. We've done it with tobacco. We do education and awareness programs. Providing those kinds of programs within the sports world is extremely important from my view. Francesco, if we could put up a slide presentation, I appreciate it. And I'll just walk through a couple of the slides that I have to share some thoughts with you there. If the first slide comes up, I'm not having it.
Vai a chiamare? Sì, un attimo di pazienza, arrivano.
Yeah, just a moment. The slides are coming. They are, yeah, they are coming. So it doesn't depend
I'll
on
continue.
me. It's the director. I'm sorry. So yeah.
No problem. So the traumas that we experience, that I experienced through the undercover work that I did, what became my therapy was the game of basketball. I played sports as a kid. And when I surfaced from doing the undercover work, I wasn't able to play basketball anymore. I didn't have the skills. So I started officiating to stay with the game because I lived on a street that had no rules and boundaries. And yet being around a sport that had boundaries and rules, it created an environment for me that caused for an inner peace. And I say to folks, when you're going through difficult times, to find your passion. And how often and how many times all of us, sports provides that passion for us and provides that inner peace. And helping people to be able to have those kinds of environments in a trusting environment, in a safe environment, is our responsibility. Our responsibility is to provide the human rights that we talk about globally, and then think about it specifically for sports. And by using pro sports, professional sports, collegiate sports, to be able to be honest about this conversation is helpful, so that the younger folks in the little leagues and in the minor leagues are able to have this freedom, that they could look up to the athletes that they admire. And then when they hear that they are willing to have an honest conversation about the experiences they had, it gives them the freedom. What is personal is universal. If you're feeling it, I'm feeling it. So the conversation of leadership, the conversation of resiliency, understanding trauma, and self-care. Helping people understand self-care does not mean selfish. Yes, Daniela. Oh, okay, I'm not seeing it right now, but it's not showing up on my screen. Okay. So I'll just continue and share. When we speak about leadership, I like to speak about four C's, and it's character, communication, the ability for caring, and the competency. We need to be competent in order to be leaders. We need to have the ability to communicate. We need strong character, and we have to have caring. We have to have empathy. That is not only leadership in leading others, those things are needed to lead ourselves as well. And providing those environments, that safe environment where someone is allowed to have the opportunity to share what they are feeling is extremely important. All too often in sports, I think that what we do is just because someone is a great athlete, we think that they're going to be a great coach or a great administrator. We need to have ongoing programs that allow for this kind of training to take place, life skill training, and specifically to what we're speaking about here, so that it can be identified when situations are developing, as has been spoken about by the folks from FIFA and all those have spoke before me. If we create these environments, we give a safety and security net to those that are the athletes that may be experiencing something that feels uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable from the experience that I went through as an undercover person. I infiltrated the mafia in New Jersey, in New York, and became another person. And that changed me. These trauma experiences change us. And having the opportunity to be able to share what we're feeling is extremely important. What is personal is universal. Folks, there's no new emotions in this world. It's how we interact with those emotions. And how are we willing to create safe spaces for these conversations to take place? That's the bar that you're moving. It's so significant that Daniela, to change the game, to create safe sport. These are our responsibilities. We have a responsibility to allow for these conversations to be had. Because if we hide these kind of conversations, as we have seen taking place in other institutions, whether it be the Catholic Church, the Little Leagues, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, all we're doing is avoiding problems. We have to become comfortable in the uncomfortable in order to have crucial conversations to create change. At times, we have to create that change for something we want to be a part of. And to make this world a better place and to create the human rights that each one of us needs to be allowed to have, that's our responsibility. You know, we're all only here for a short time. And how we make a decision to live our lives for the betterment of others is a servant leadership heart. And servant leadership is what creates changes within organizations, create changes in life. And it's my honor to be part of this. I work as an MBA Cares ambassador as well and go around the world and have been to Iraq and Afghanistan to work with
mandale pure.
military. And to spend time with athletes around the world. And when we do that, we come to understand that we are more alike than we are different. That this world is very small. And the more that we can spend time together having these kinds of conversations, we are going to create change. And I don't mean to sound over dramatic, but this is like a ground war. You fight it 1 inch by 1 inch each day. Change comes slowly, but if we create the change over a period of time, in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now, there is a tremendous significance of change that will take place. So Daniela, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the opportunity to be here with you all, and any way that I can ever be of help to anyone in this group. You know, we put a very short time of information very quickly, but there's any, please share my information, my email, my contact information with everyone that's involved here. And it's an honor to be with you. And as I said in the video, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of one another. But most importantly, take care of you too. Thank you, Daniel.
Grazie a te.
Thank you very much, Bob. I would like to ask the director, see if we can send Bob's slide again, if he wants to explain them. Unfortunately, we had a small technical problem. Can we share the slides?
Yes, absolutely.
So Bob, so here they are. Please show the slides. So this is very good. I am the anti-mafia referee. This is one of the, yeah. Then let's move on, which could be number 3. They are not shared on your screen. They are shared on the live feed that they are sending on Facebook or YouTube. So yeah, so I'm telling you.
Okay.
So we have the slide with sono l'arbitro antimafia. So Bob, unfortunately, we had a technical problem with the director, so we can't understand. Yes, they are shown in the live feed. Probably you can't see them from your computer.
That's fine. It's all good. That's the formula that I now see. Yes. Yeah, I see that. I see now, Danielle. I see now. So that's the formula that I shared earlier. That was the experienced intellectual readiness and reflection. And reflection is so important. We have to be reflective in order to have development and growth. And you can move to the next slide as well. And and development and growth comes through. It continues, if you would. I'll close with this slide. This is Craig Sager. And Craig said that for those of you that followed the NBA, Craig was a TNT announcer. He was a sports announcer. And he had cancer, and lived his life to the fullest. But he said when he got the ESPYs award, the Jimmy V Foundation award at the ESPYs, he said, time is something that cannot be bought. It cannot be wagered with God. And it is not an endless supply. Time is simply how you live your life. And each one of you, I applaud because you're living your life with a servant heart. You have a concern for young folks. You have concern for our fellow human beings around the world to cause for an environment that will create change. And positive change comes one step at a time. And Daniela, I applaud you for being the catalyst behind this, because change comes when we have a voice that is willing to lead us and bring us all together, and we all work for the same cause. And as I said earlier, any way that I can help and be of help to any one of you, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. It's an honor to be with you. God bless, stay safe. Thank you.
Let me thank Bob by using a term I think he likes. You're considered to be enrolled. You're with us, Bob. So we will rely on you. Thank you very much, Bob. When we assess an expert or a coach or a referee as well, we tend to somehow not to see the negative part, but just the positive part, let's say, the medals, the prizes, how good he or she is. And this is something detrimental sometimes. Culture is exactly like this. Avoiding privileging and seeing just the technical aspects, because sometimes abuse is very difficult to tackle when we have very, very renowned coaches. So which are the reactions we are finding? Disbelief. We try to not to see, let's say, and to neglect testimonies. We don't want to see them. We don't want to see the negative part. The other part is hidden. We tend to prefer to avoid, not to see the truth instead of taking account of it. So there's a strong culture that is the result of a lack of culture, let me say this, because sometimes we don't want to change. Roberto before mentioned my book, a book I wrote in a moment where I saw that there was no room for speaking. While American journals, for example, the Indianapolis Star or the Guardian or the New York Times, well, in Italy, this is not happening. So I was asking, let's talk about this. Let's have investigations. And then I had the idea of this book, of writing this book. So which were the reactions? Let me mention just one. FIDAF said, you might thread a report. And the story I was mentioning in my book was actually true, and it was reported also by many newspapers. So I found myself trying to, to avoid the same trap. So we are not always tackling the problem. We are always avoiding it. And the theory is always the same. And some people read the FIDAF position, and they reported me about other cases. And maybe this type of behavior is not good for anybody and for them as well, because if we go on with trying to neglecting and avoiding these things, we will not go any further. We need to have a change in culture. And let's now talk to Katie Hanna, Vice President of the U.S. Center for Safe Sports, and an autonomous, independent court that was created in 2017, devoted to abuse and harassments in sport. And they deal with integrity for athletes and for young people especially. Katie, so you trained 1 million people, families, athletes, kids, so very significant numbers. A couple of days ago, you had a new ban for an important athlete. You are continuing to work, you're free, independent, autonomous. And Katie Hanna will talk about this change in culture. And this is very positive for us, especially for us Italians, because we are having troubles in changing the culture. Katie, the floor to you.
Thank you, Daniela, and all of the wonderful panelists. It is truly an honor to be here. And I'm excited by the momentum that we have around the world to talk about creating a safer sport environment. So, as Daniela shared, we have been open since 2017. And at the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, we're focused on athlete well-being as the centerpiece of our nation's sports culture. We do this in 3 ways. It's through abuse prevention, through education, and accountability. We focus on changing culture and making sure that sport is safer for everyone. And so we know that changing culture requires leadership, focus, commitment, and teamwork. And these are all skills that are required of athletes training for the very highest level of achievement within their sport. And central to ending abuse in sport is the foundation of athlete stories, of courageous survivors who have come forward saying enough, and of bystanders who will now not stand by and allow a culture of violence to be tolerated anymore. The culture is changing as we speak daily, and all of us on this call, joining us from the Facebook live stream, all of us are part of this. At the U.S. Center for Safe Sports, our model is uniquely positioned in that we focus on education and preventing abuse before anyone is harmed, holding individuals accountable when someone is harmed, and holding those organizations responsible for their role in complying with our policies and following our best practices. So part of a comprehensive prevention strategy is really about putting athletes at the center. It's about hearing directly from survivors. Each and every survivor's experience and decision about reporting is different. Some may tell a teammate or a friend right away. Some may wait until their season has ended due to fears of retaliation, and others may wait decades until the environment and the culture has changed in their sport, in their community, or in their life. Supporting survivors is built on a foundation of choice and empowerment. Survivors should be presented with all options and avenues that are afforded to them through the criminal justice system, civil system, educational system, and the sport resolution process. So in 2019 alone, we've sanctioned more than 627 individuals that committed abuse and misconduct in sport. As an independent, confidential place for athletes to report abuse, we have seen increasing reports over the last 4 years. More athletes know where to go, how to report, and we're independent from their national governing body. We understand the historical and systemic barriers that survivors have faced, and we have built a system with trauma-informed trained investigators. We acknowledge and welcome that survivors are often going through multiple systems, and each system has a different purpose. The criminal justice system can remove someone from society temporarily or permanently, but it has a limit on how long ago it can prosecute certain crimes. The civil system can address damages to attempt to make things right, and it too often has a time clock on how far back a case can be heard. The educational system within the US includes rights under Title IX, providing access to an educational environment that is free from sexual abuse and harassment. That system can remove someone from an educational institution, but only has jurisdiction at the school or within school programs. And the center's process is an administrative one that works closely with law enforcement. Through our Safe Sport Code, we can remove someone from participating in sport through temporary restrictions while investigating, and up to permanent ineligibility for individuals that are affiliated with organizations within the US Olympic and Paralympic sports. And our process, unlike many of the other systems I just mentioned, is one of very few anywhere that has no statute of limitation on sexual abuse reports and taking action to remove an individual from sport through a fair process. Our system allows for encourages claimants and respondents to have a representative of their choice. That can be an attorney, that can be an advocate, or others. And all of our systems that work across ensuring accountability owe it to providing a trauma-informed response, and that what we commit to every day at the US Center for Safe Sport is just that. No judgment, a recognition of the impact of trauma, and just the facts associated with the case. We're also looking at expanding our jurisdiction to address more reports that are coming forward with regards to emotional and physical abuse and misconduct in sport. We've worked on cases that have actually been reopened by law enforcement because of our investigations, cases that involve children and reports that involve adults. And we also know that our system and no system is perfect. We are always striving for continuous improvement and providing the best response possible. Last fall, we launched a climate survey because we want to hear directly from athletes about our process. What is working, what is not working, and how can we make sport safer for you? The climate survey asked athletes about emotional and physical abuse and misconduct, sexual abuse experiences, diversity inclusion, their satisfaction or their disengagement within sport, mental health, access to resources, the barriers that athletes are facing with regards to reporting. Do they know about the resources that we offer, as well as pure norms that exist within their specific sports? We plan to publish the findings of the climate survey this summer, as well as building on the incredible work that's been happening in Canada around Athletes Can with their climate survey and engaging athletes in conversations about what we do next together. We look forward to partnering with all of you here in Italy, as well as the wonderful work that's happening with FIFA as we think about this global mission to end abuse in sport. And so we know that athlete voice is critical to preventing and responding to abuse in sport, and prevention must be comprehensive. This includes frameworks like the social ecological model, addressing prevention at individual, relationship, community, and societal levels. At the center, we've developed more than 14 online training programs, and we've reached more than 2 million individuals to prevent abuse. These trainings reach parents, youth, adult athletes, administrators, coaches, and recently we had 2 different external advisory groups and developed a new training program focused on inclusivity for athletes with disabilities, as well as one that's focused on working with health professionals. Additionally, our team of talented trainers goes all across the country or virtually right now during the pandemic, working directly with sport organizations in the US to customize training focused on their sport structure. We require training of coaches and administrators and also board members and everyone who is in a leadership position within a governing body. Last year, we launched a comprehensive athlete safety coordinator training so that each representative at a national governing body should receive standardized baseline training to address athlete safety. And our Safe Sport Athlete Advisory team members reach other athletes across the country, and our locally based youth advisory board is focused on preventing abuse in sport at the high school level. Over the last 2 years, we have also worked on an environmental approach to prevention. It's not just about that individual level training, it's about making sure we're changing the cultures within sports. We've partnered with Dr. Keith Kaufman to apply the sport situational prevention approach, and I'll just share with you that this is going to be a program that so far has engaged athletes, parents, coaches, and administrators. And later this year, we're going to be publishing a manual that will be available free to any sport organization to be able to implement that program. We also know that, with COVID, there's been impacts that everyone has faced around the world. And we found that being able to implement some of these programs virtually has actually engaged more athletes, more parents, and more coaches online. And so when we think about some of these prevention approaches, I think it's important to note that policy and public policy plays a critical role in preventing and responding to abuse in sport. In the US, we've been fortunate to see the passage of 2 landmark federal laws over the last 3 years. These laws have further strengthened athlete protections and rights and have provided sustainable funding to address sexual, emotional, and physical abuse in sport, and particularly at the US Center for Safe Sport, funding dedicated to investigate more cases of abuse. Additionally, we have a required minor athlete abuse prevention policies. We published our first set of policies in 2019. We have a new version that goes into effect in January of 2022. And what we've seen is that more third-party reporters and bystanders are recognizing early indicator behaviors like grooming and one-on-one contacts. As more and more people are recognizing the signs of abuse, identifying it and reporting it, and intervening as bystanders, we're able to intervene earlier on for prevention. And we are seeing the culture changing in sport. And as our team of auditors goes out into the field at sanctioned events, at practices, and through desk audits of policies, they verify the training records, making sure that the policies through our MAP and our Safe Sport Code of Conduct are being followed. And we're seeing greater accountability and increased community level prevention. Athletes have spoken. Athletes' voices are powerful. And to the more than 7,000 reports and people who've reached out to report abuse to us in just 4 years, thank you. Your voice matters, your intervention matters. You may not always see the direct impact of your actions, but know that you make a difference in the lives of athletes. There is much work ahead of us, and the global momentum that we have together on this call is incredibly empowering, and it sends a powerful message to the world that preventing abuse in sport is possible. So again, thank you, Daniela, and to all the amazing panelists and individuals that are doing this work around the world and in Italy. It is truly an honor to be here today, and I look forward to continuing to work together with you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Wonderful words, as usual. So I would like to go back on the topic of trust. People talk when you have a climate of trust, when you know that you can be welcomed. So I would like to talk about some shortcomings of the Italian system. So the statute of limitations in Italian is 5 and 8 for match fixing, 8 seasons for match fixing. We are proposing 10 statute of limitations for 10 seasons for sexual abuses and sexual harassment, so that a child can grow and report, be autonomous, and not depend on the parents. So that goes without saying, should go without saying. So it doesn't take to be a father and mother, but a child not always talk to their own parents. So we need to give them this opportunity. So sports must give this opportunity. 4 years are nothing. So we need to allow the victim to intervene in the binary sports trial. Well, the victim is melancholically left aside. The victim waits, and nobody will tell him or her, not even the date of a hearing, because the sports adjudication is made of two parts: the federal prosecutor and the plaintiff and the accused person. So there is the possibility of intervening, but the Italian Olympic Committee refused this possibility. But we believe that at least for abuses and sexual violence, we need to have a different regime, because we cannot think that harassment and abuse or sexual violence is like, you know, a foul or a fixed match, because this is what you're doing. So this culture, the commitment must lead to something different from this, because as long as we'll have this kind of organization, I believe that nobody will report anything. So beware. We guaranteed people, we put some reports forwards, but it's very hard, because even we did in behalf of the association, when a girl calls you, do you know anything? Was it, you know, dismissed? What can I answer? So I'm thinking a lot about it before going to sports justice. And the Football Association did some apertures, and I don't see Vito here because I would like to show the website. So if you're ready, we would like to. So let's display the what the Italian Football Association is doing. I'd like to say something important. These are not trivial decisions, because we are working with the football case in Trieste. We are doing it in close cooperation with the public, with the with the prosecutor of the Italian Football Association. So we have a new reporting mechanism in the Italian Football Association. Then you certainly have the right of being trained by competent people, the right of, you know, having trainings according to your rhythms. You can see the website. It was presented together with us in one of the previous meetings. So I'd like to thank Vito Di Gioia, the president of Italian grassroots football, because he did an excellent work, and because we can work together. It looked impossible to work together, but it became a reality, and we are working together every day. So we were talking about the climate of trust that you create in order to report. Otherwise, it would be pointless talking about reports, and they could become a sort of boomerang. So these are topics, you know, the statute of limitations, the binary trial, the insensitiveness, the absence of a specific regulation, a specific violation, and something that could resemble the criminal code. So we also need competent people. So each topic would deserve a different webinar, but we believe, and we also think about the rubbles that these events left behind. So we are always exposed, and we always come later. So we called Maria Leister from the Harvard Medical School, a lawyer, because she deals with these topics. And when I called her a lot of time ago, because we take a long time to organize these meetings, I know, but she suggested me a topic which I believe it's the core. So what happens after the reports? What happens when the spotlights are turned off? Well, in Italy, they're never turned on anyway, but we can imagine that they can be turned on once and then, but our spotlights are on. And then life must go on, then school must go on. and the everyday life must go on. So there's a mother who I love who's called Mariana. I hope she's connected. She said that her child doesn't sleep at night. A year has passed. And in order to sleep, at night, she needs to take her in a car. She needs to drive around her block in order to make him relax. These are the problems that these events leave behind, especially when the abuser, the perpetrator, as Paolo Giulini says, is a person that belonging to the circle of trust, is a second father, is a person we love. So we are lost. We are lost in this kind of prism. Mariah Lester, the floor to you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Daniela. Thank you for inviting me back today to speak on this very important topic. As Daniela mentioned, I am the human rights faculty and co-director with the Harvard Medical School's Harvard Program in Refugee Trauma, Global Mental Health Recovery and Trauma and Recovery Program. While I have a legal background, particularly in criminal defense and US immigration law, my current work is multidisciplinary in nature, reflecting one of the most important principles of the Global Mental Health course, which is to solve some of the world's greatest issues, you must have an interdisciplinary team to solve those problems, something that this group right here, Daniela, and supporting individuals and organizations are doing with this international initiative to provide effective oversight and protections in professional sport for two vulnerable populations, minors and female athletes. This issue is very important to me personally because as a child, institutions that had the duty to protect my own well-being failed to do so, which left me vulnerable to abuse and trauma. The women in my Korean families or Korean mother's generation were victims of sexual violence that was made worse by not just institutional neglect, but these institutions were complicit in the dehumanizing and dignity violating acts against these women. Because of the abuse my mother suffered, I was made vulnerable to poverty, neglect, and eventual abandonment, leaving me stateless without a country to call my home for the first 5 years of my life, living in post-war Korea, a very economically and politically volatile time during the 1970s in Korea's history. So these traumatic events had a lifelong impact on me that eventually led me on this quest to answer the question, why do people behave in ways that dehumanize and hurt others, while also working to ensure that everyone's dignity and humanity are preserved and respected? So sexual abuse and harassment in sport has been a problem for a very long time. And in recent years, the abuse of athletes in sport, especially professional sports, has become a growing concern or area of concern and of research. By using both a human rights and trauma framework, we can better understand the impact of sexual abuse on athletes and our responsibility to guarantee safety and protection for the most vulnerable among them. So research shows that when children experience abuse, in this case within the sports setting, the physical and emotional wounds can last a lifetime, impacting the long-term health of that individual, even into adulthood. The trauma not only has long-lasting effects on the victim, it also has a devastating impact on communities and to the sport itself. We need to ensure that safety and protection of these young athletes are given top priority within our communities and within our policies. We must empower athletes to come forward and report such abuses to a caring adult and create safe and healthy environments for them to do so. More importantly, systems must be instituted to hold perpetrators accountable for such abuses. In the unfortunate instance where children and young adults have experienced abuse, they must be given a path to healing in order to reclaim their lost childhood and live a full life free from harm. So how do we prevent these abuses from happening in the future? And how do we create systems where the most vulnerable athletes never endure suffering from these abuses? So I want to contextualize our conversation within the framework of international human rights and dignity violations as the moral and ethical foundation to look at the collective work we're all doing today. And I want to also speak with you about the traumatic impact of the abuse on the individual by looking at the issue through this human rights and trauma-informed lens. We can better be equipped to protect the most vulnerable athletes and prevent these terrible acts of abuse. So at its core, trauma is an act of humiliation, violating one's dignity, and in some cases rises to the level of being a human rights violation, wherein the human rights ideals and frameworks goal is to realize the dignity that is inherent in us as human beings, bringing about rehumanization and ultimately healing. As I speak with you, please keep in mind the following questions, and I don't have slides to post, but try to remember these as I'll touch on some of their main themes throughout the time with you. And I imagine we'll all collectively attempt to answer if we are to truly guarantee safety and protection for these young people and athletes. So the first question for you, and the question of concern is, how do we center the dignity of the most vulnerable athletes, particularly children and women, within the context of professional sport and guarantee their safety and protection? The second question is, how do we elevate the issue of sexual abuse in sport and the traumatic impact on individuals to get the attention and concern of the international community, something that we've been hearing all morning and afternoon. So the third question is, why is it so difficult to bring these cases forward? And lastly, the fourth question is, why has it been so difficult to get people and institutions to publicly denounce abuses and communicate the importance of reporting these behaviors? Knowing and understanding the traumatic impact of abuse and harassment will help to create the necessary urgency through which this issue must be confronted and dealt with. It is also critical to understand why preserving and restoring human dignity is imperative to preventing abuse and liberating victims from the abuse and trauma. So the intersection of human rights violations and traumatic effects or events is where much of our work of safety and protection exists, and the integration of these two concepts serve to help us all better appreciate and adequately respond to trauma. So typically trauma is an emotional response to a very terrible event in a human being's life, like it could be an accident, it could be rape, natural disaster. In general, a traumatic event is an event that is out of the ordinary range of human experience. So immediately following the traumatic event, shock and denial are typical. Research indicates that most traumatic stress and dissociation, that post-traumatic stress and dissociation are the key responses to traumatic events. Survivors of sexual abuse may be particularly at risk for developing post-traumatic stress and dissociative symptomology. Longer-term reactions to traumatic events include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea or the like. While these feelings are normal, some people have difficulty moving on with their lives because it can lead to the feelings of guilt, shame, humiliation that cuts through to the core of the human being and that individual's feeling of self-worth and dignity. Sexual harassment and abuse are categorized as forms of sex discrimination. They include unwanted sexual activity with perpetrators using force, making threats, or taking advantage of victims not able to give consent. it is also the use of offensive stereotypes based on gender to sexual jokes, threats, or intimidation within settings where the individual's human rights are not acknowledged or where the athlete is not valued as an individual. It is more likely that sexual harassment and abuse will happen. We must get to the place where all athletes understand their rights and inherent dignity, and where everyone understands their duty to protect the rights and dignity of others. So the consequences of sexual abuse can be manifested biologically, psychologically, and sociologically. It can have devastating effects on the individual's day-to-day activities as a result of extreme psychological distress. The tendency to withdraw, avoid, reenact the traumatic event, suicidality, and sleep problems can be just a few of the more long-term reactions to the abuse. And left untreated, it can result in a lifetime of post-traumatic stress, depression, and anxiety. The trauma from the abuse affects not just the victim, it also affects their family and the sport community, because sexual abuse is seen as shameful by many societies. We tend to suppress information about them. This trauma-related shame perpetuates the codes of silence and keeps the abuses covered up and ultimately the abusers protected. The impact of the abuse is amplified when the victim perceives that bystanders know about the abuse, yet nothing is done to stop the abusive behavior as a result. And in the eyes of the athlete or the victim, they're abandoned to isolation and silence. There can also be perception by the victim that non-intervening adults are powerless in relation to the perpetrator, which can contribute to the impact of the trauma. So when institutions who are expected to provide protections to athletes do not protect, betrayal trauma exists. And this betrayal trauma is trauma independent of the reaction to the trauma itself. As caretakers of our international human rights doctrines, we are all responsible for safeguarding our children and holding accountable our institutions. Our failure to safeguard athletes is a reflection on our failure to uphold our ideals of the international human rights doctrines and protections of dignity, at times prioritizing the reputation of the institution over the well-being of athletes by covering up acts of sexual violence. The United Nations explains that human rights are rights inherent in all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, and that everyone is entitled to these rights without discrimination. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights highlights the failure of humanity to recognize the dignity in all human beings when it pointed out that disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts against which have outraged the conscience of mankind, prompting it to task the world from its inception on defending the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. So guaranteeing safety and protection of the most vulnerable athletes is effectively defending their inherent dignity. So because athletes have rights under the UN Convention on Human Rights, it's critical for us to know that obligations are on us to protect these athletes. Furthermore, minor athletes have rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. The rights of the child are explained by UNICEF within its mission, which states that its work is for all the world's children: health, education, equality, protection. So UNICEF is mandated by the UN General Assembly to advocate for the protection of children's rights, to help meet their basic needs, and to facilitate the expansion of their opportunities to reach their full potential. And UNICEF is guided by the Convention on the Rights of the Child and strives to establish children's rights and enduring ethical principles and international standards of behavior towards children. And included in these list of rights is the rights to protection from sexual harassment and abuse. Centering dignity as the locus of the work that we're doing to ensure safety and protections of athletes is critical as it expands the reach and the scope of the human rights frameworks. And it, in a way, democratizes who deserves rights protections. The incorporation of dignity in our conversation today establishes that we are all deserving of respect because there is something inherent and special about our humanness. So at its core, a traumatic event inflicted on another individual is an act to humiliate an individual that violates their dignity. And the goal of our international human rights instruments is to acknowledge the dignity inherent in every human being, creating institutions that keep the humanity of athletes intact, thus creating paths to justice and ultimately of healing for human rights and dignity violations, which in most instances are traumatic events. So just a little bit about the concept of dehumanization, since I mentioned it a few times throughout. It has been said that dehumanization is a sort of mental loophole that allows us to hurt other people. It gives us a way to see our fellow humans as being less than human, which allows us to treat them in ways we wouldn't necessarily treat them had we truly understood their inherent worth and dignity. So dehumanization of athletes happens when they are treated as sometimes superhuman, rather than just as regular human beings like the rest of us, leading to objectification and harm. One such victim describes feeling, quote, like a machine or an object for their use, end quote. In this instance, it is clear that this person's dignity was violated by being dehumanized to a level where they believed their only function was to perform for the benefit of spectators and the institution. So dignity serves as a reminder to protect the most important asset of a human being and to ensure the preservation of our humanizing qualities. Dignity centers the conversation on those who are most impacted by abuse. When we begin to respect and preserve the dignity of all, in this instance, athletes, we get much closer to the aspirational language of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by protecting those who are most vulnerable. When cultural and social forces silence victims, they become more vulnerable to abuse and violations against their dignity. Additionally, the silence of victims creates pathways for more abuses to happen and ultimately protects the abuser. And generally speaking, silence of victims is perpetrated through three overarching mechanisms. The first is the hierarchical nature that is perpetuated through the systems and institutions within the relationship between, for instance, coaches and athletes that position athletes in a way that disallows them to question this hierarchical structure and in effect disallowing them from questioning potential or actual abuse. The second is the trauma-related shame, which keeps the victim silent to the abuse. And the third is the systemic power imbalances that puts the athlete in a vulnerable position, leaving them open to violations against their humanity and ultimately their dignity. These power imbalances create systems that fail to provide the necessary protections. So at what point do institutions become accountable for allowing these abuses to happen? So abuse is preventable, as we've heard today by all of our speakers, and safety can be guaranteed. It is critical to change cultures that enable the abuse of athletes, combining both this human rights and trauma framework to any cultural change initiative underscores the injustices to athletes that lies at the root of the trauma they experience, creating these pathways to justice and healing. An integrated approach also promotes participation and empowerment, whereby athletes are not just passive actors, but are empowered rights holders with agency and with rights to own their careers, their athletic careers. And as rights bearers, athletes can demand accountability from those who have the duty to protect and pressure institutions, states, and the international community into action. So that would include all of us. So all of these components will lead to conditions that protect, promote mental health and well-being. In some cases, the way to eliminate structural problems that lead to abuse does not require overhauling the whole institution. The remedy is to develop a much deeper understanding of these structural conditions that created a system that makes certain athletes more vulnerable and allows for abuses to happen. And then just simply start there and act there. So this community here on this event knows better than any other that the incredible positive societal impact that sport can have. We also know that sport has the potential to heal communities and that it can have positive impact on people who have experienced trauma. But when people are abused in the sports environment, it is that much more damaging. When we allow the most vulnerable among us to suffer the trauma of abuse, we not only betray the athlete, we betray our own humanity. The more we as an international community understand the prevalence and impact of trauma, and the more we apply a human rights perspective in our work as leaders, helping professionals, researchers, educators, legal professionals, journalists, and scientists, the better position we will be to develop and implement effective interventions to prevent and heal trauma and to secure these rights for athletes. So I'm celebrating the incredible work of the Change the Game, this event, Daniela, the work of other organizations represented here, and the community of people represented in past meetings who are working on this initiative to help solve these very important and pressing problems in the international world of sport. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Daniela, for hosting this event. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Maria. I remember when I told you about these ideas during a very rainy evening in Orvieto. It was 2 years ago, if I remember. And we started a friendship, a collaboration, and with immense affection. And then we will have another call next week. Obviously, this is the last of 5 events funded by the Candido Cannava Foundation. We will start with other 10 events. So we will sure meet again. And I'm particularly happy about this. And I would like to thank all the people that helped us in over these 2 years. Sometimes it was very difficult. I must say that sometimes I was very frustrated, but then this frustration was transformed and changed. So I'm very happy, and I would like to help you all. And let me thank Paolo Giulini, a special person. Paolo was one of the first people with which I talked to, and Francesca Garberino, criminologist, a very, very affectionate woman. There's a friendship among us, and we've been dealing relationships going beyond the profession. Paolo Giannini is a pioneer. He elaborated this project from where we started for Inter Milan. And 2 years ago, well, actually 20 years seems to have passed, but it's just 2 years ago. And then my friend, Paola, a very inspirational friend of mine for her generosity and intelligence, Francesca Negri. Francesca Negri, I love you very much. I talked to you when FIDAF and Siemen might have threatened my work. And then we have Vito Di Gioia, Khalida Popal, and all the people that have always been there for us. Alessandra Marzari. Alessandra is not here because she is playing, but she created this association. All our prosecutors, lawyers, studying how to tackle these issues in the sports justice. And lawyer Gallavotti is listening to us. We should deal with these cases because sometimes for people it is easier to go through sports justice instead of normal regular justice. And I would like to conclude to make with an example. 10 years ago, a 14-year-old girl was raped and also drugged by her coach. She had the courage to report, but then there was a conflict of attribution between courts. After 11 years, the trial started, the penal trial. After 12 years, there may be the statute of limitations. So as you can see, for a young girl, this is very harmful. Now she's grown up, and this long trial repercuted also on other forms of trauma and frustration. So sports justice, there's somehow in America is represented by the US Center for Safe Sports, is quite rapid, quite fast. And, you know, it's feasible for victims because perpetrators may be banned in quite a short time. They can give answers. So not just going through a penal trial, because sometimes young people want to just live their lives, have a boyfriend, have fun, and go beyond this trauma. So sports justice for me is a compulsory step for all these events, and we should focus on it. There's no sanction, there's no violation, and I think that we should restart from here. As for our projects, we will make a podcast. We particularly care about this. Together with Carlo Annese, we have a book for children. It is almost ready with 20 drawings explaining what should be done in sports. And as Katie Hannah knows, we are starting a book for families, for parents. So we are sharing material to start this job. You are updating it. And then we will organize 10 meetings with you, Paolo, Francesca, Maria, all the people involved. It will be live. Also to answer the questions from families, from parents. So there's a long way to go. And if we are able to go beyond, it would be thank to you, and I would like to devote the last minutes to this book telling about all of you, about Kalida, about all the families that went to us and helped us write this book. There's also a very critical part on sports justice. And we have a message from Gianfelice Facchetti. Let me show this video.
Lo sport ancora oggi è una continua fonte inesauribile di emozioni e proprio per il suo essere così seducente
Thank you to Gianfelice. It was an unexpected gift. And let me show you the pictures of some of the victims. Can we zoom on them? Here they are. So this book was written for them, and I'm particularly happy to be able to see these faces all together. There's also Gianluigi. Gianluigi is helping me because we dealt with the same issue together. I'm extremely grateful to you all. Thank you all for what you've been doing. Thank you, lawyer Mario Gallavotti. You've been very direct, but also very sympathetic. And at the beginning, we were quite formal, but then we moved to a more informal relationship. So we are more and more spontaneous. Then Joyce, I had already heard about her. A special woman with a strong charisma. I've been touched by your words. A friend of mine. Katie, Hannah, a friend of mine, thank you very much. And then Maria, you're always in my heart. Then Paolo, I would like to leave the floor to you. Paolo, let's conclude this afternoon. May I tell you something? When I met Paolo, obviously I knew what he was doing in the Bollate jail in Milan. I had studied a lot about him. I saw the video, the interviews. So I was struck by this figure. And then I was invited by him. I was invited to a party, and then we started a friendship, because I think it's important also to be more informal and to grow more also on the professional side. So the floor to you, Paolo. I love you. Thank you. It's an honor and also a burden for me to conclude this session. I don't want to add anything because we've been saying a lot so far. I completely agree with Bob. The capacity to bring together issues, themes, experts on this very delicate side. The richness of the contribution and the speeches before me, the testimonies, the accounts, the importance of seeing international associations like FIFA that are working a lot on this. Well, this is huge. This is brilliant for me, and I would like to live it, and I would like to have it as well in our next meeting, hoping that we will attract more and more enthusiasm, resources, and people. And I'm particularly proud to be part of these reflections, this growth. And I would like to thank all the previous speakers. So it's time to say goodbye. Is there anybody who would like to add something? Just thank to the interpreters. The interpreters, we are very, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. I don't have the complete panel, but I would like to thank you all and see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.